Welcome back to Interview Out, where our mission is to help 100,000 people land their dream jobs. This week, we have a principal product manager, and the leadership principle at work is hire and develop the best. The question that was asked of this candidate is to walk me through their framework for developing the careers of their team members. As with all these videos, we will play back the mock interview as it happens. I will jump in from time to time with commentary to help you understand what I was thinking when I heard what the candidate said, why I asked specific questions, some real-time kind of coaching analysis as it goes. And then at the end of the video, we'll have the assessment of the candidate, which is basically what I would have read into the room had I been on the hiring loop. Incidentally, if you'd like to sign up for a free mock interview or sign up for our VIP service or use any of the other services that we make available at interviewout.com, I would encourage you to go check that out because there are lots of tools there available for job searchers just like you. I would like you to walk me through your framework for how you develop the careers of members of your team, right? Because you talked a little bit about how you're managing people now, you've managed people in the past. So I want to start at a high level on your philosophy on how you grow talent.
Okay. Well,
and sorry if I use a colloquialism like grow talent. I don't, because I know English is not your first language. Make your team members better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first part of my...
Something that is very interesting to point out here is I actually get a lot of candidates that come from international locations, and this has been surprising to me. In fact, it feels almost over-indexed on international candidates, which has helped me, one, understand that, you know what, interviews on video over international lines, it's a struggle. And so here's something you really need to think about. If you're an international candidate and you're interviewing for a job where they're using English for the interview and English is not your primary language, couple things. One, audio really matters. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody have one of these nice, expensive microphones that I've now kind of built my way up to. I started with the microphone on my laptop, which was awful. Then I switched to the Bluetooth connection of my headphones to my computer. Again, not great, but slightly better because the microphone was at least close to my mouth until I realized that the microphone was scratching on the side of my shirt. So that's bad. And then I moved to a Yeti microphone, a USB powered microphone. Bad audio, a lot of reverb, a lot of bouncing. You're too far away from the microphone and it's muffled. It can make it exceedingly difficult for the interviewer to understand what it is you're saying. Even in a time of video where I can see the lips moving as an interviewer and I can try to parse it back and get back to the meaning, it can get really, really tough and it's really, really hard. So something for you to think about if you're an international candidate and you're interviewing in English and English is not your primary language is, one, you might want to do a test of your audio to really understand how your audio is coming through when you do a Zoom call or a Chime or whatever service, Blue Jeans, Teams meeting, whatever that you're using. Understand what your audio sounds like, because when I send the links for people for these videos and they hear back how they sound on my end, wow, they sometimes are really surprised. So that's one. Two, slow down, which is kind of ironic coming from me, given how fast I talk. I get it. I have been much more aware recently of slowing down my pace and making sure that I talk in a way that is easier for people to understand, especially my international subscribers and viewers. So that's also something for you to consider is sometimes the cadence and patter of your native tongue finds its way into the English. And if you're using hard to understand kind of accent, that can get in the way and make it very, very difficult. And the absolute worst thing that can happen to you as a candidate is the interviewer just kind of flips the bit and says, this is too hard, and then decides to move on, right? Because their default position is no. Their default position is I'm not going to hire. And if they can't defend you as a candidate because they didn't understand anything, and it gets to the point where they're just tired of saying, hey, can you repeat that? Or I don't understand it. They're just going to flip the bit and they're going to move on. So it's just something to keep in mind. And it's obviously another reason why I would encourage, whether you do it with Interview At or any of the other services that are available. Look, there's a lot of good services out there. Even colleagues do a mock interview, but do a mock interview to understand how you're presenting on screen, because so many of these interviews are happening on video right now.
My framework is on the hiring process. So I always try to hire people who are better than me. This is one thing that I always look for during the selection process. After the people are inside my team, I have one-on-one sessions on a weekly basis with all of the product managers who answer to me. And on a monthly basis, we have this checkpoint on which we do the follow-up for their career plans. Okay, let me give you a step back. On a 2-quarter basis, we develop a career plan in partnership between my employee, and I can help them making questions, making assessments, considering in each level of the ladder they are, what are the competencies that they should be learning, both behavioral or technical. And once we have this career plan, I do the monthly follow-up. We call it a checkpoint process. And on a weekly basis is more a day-to-day tracking of it and discussing blockers and things that are on their way.
Sure. Well, so this answer starts fine, and it's fine. It's a bit high level, but it's fine. But the question is specifically about the candidate's framework for how they grow talent. Okay. And as an answer, the candidate really never connected the dots on this is my process for how I manage all of my employees' kind of check-ins and one-on-ones, and the actual process or framework by which they're growing the candidate, right? It's presented in a way that I believe the candidate believes that this is how you grow or how they grow their talent, which is, I meet with them regularly and we talk about, we set the goals and we do that, but none of that is really talking about, the 4 basic food groups: do more of, do less of, start doing, stop doing, right? That's really where you can focus a lot of energy when you're managing talent, but helping them identify and understand their competencies, what they're very, very good at, and their deficiencies, where they're kind of struggling, and then mapping that to where do they want to be, right? What are their aspirations? What are their career goals? What are they trying to accomplish, 1 year, 3 year, 5 years down the road? And are they on the right path to get there? And none of that really came through. And while the question itself, as far as a setup and an action, kind of is asking for, give me your philosophy, and it's more of a framework. There's no example given here. Not really talking about any particular candidate, which is fine. That's fine, but that's what is causing me to ask the next question. So then, can you give me an example of how this has played out in a positive way with somebody who's on your team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a good example of that. 2 years and a half ago, I hired an intern, a young girl. She was on the university back at the time. And once we started the development process, I asked her which career path she wanted to go, if she wanted to go to the data analytics part or to the product management part. And once I knew that, we started to develop her, setting up courses, things that she needed to study, some courses that she needed to do, and also some jobs to be done. And those jobs helped her to develop those technical and behavioral competencies. After 1 year, I hired her. She was ready to the associate product manager level. I follow up her level of competence and how this matched with the ladder that we currently have here. And recently, last December, I promoted her to product manager level 1, because she is like all the way to the top. She is developing really fast and delivering all the things that we are planning on her career plan, and also on the OKRs.
Okay, so in this case, the question was asked because I wanted to understand, okay, how did this play out, right? Walk me through an example of someone who you worked through a process. And the candidate, maybe they just misunderstood the question. Maybe they were like, all right, well, here's someone who got promoted and therefore it worked. But what the candidate has still not done is convinced me, the interviewer, that they have a process for continuously assisting in the improvement of their team members, right? Yeah, great. We identified where they want to go. Cool. But how are they getting there, right? It's not so much the end goal here that matters. There's a process. There's the how, and how were they getting that person there? Did they overcome some adversity? That's certainly helpful in one of these kinds of conversations. Certainly not necessary, but always helpful. But at this point in the interview, there's not a clear process. It's more, I met with them often, and in this case, this person was really good, and we got them promoted. I mean, that's a short summary of what this candidate has shared thus far. And my gut is telling me, just based on how the rest of the interview went, that there's more to it than that. And so this is, again, another case where maybe English as a second language, or third language as the case might be here, is potentially getting in the way, but I don't think so. I think what's actually happening here is just not grasping the question when asked and then making sure you answer it. And so something I like to I jokingly ask in follow-ups with folks who come through interview at is, hey, how many times have you answered a question in an interview and you get to the end of the question or end of your answer and you can't actually remember the question? We've all been there. Happens all the time. And I think this is a case where that actually happened. And so what direct role did you have in kind of her growth? I mean, I get the setting the goals, but help me understand, how you directly impacted her growth versus she was just really talented and you hired someone smarter than you. So this is the question, right? This is why that question got asked. Everything I just covered, right? It's I need more depth here. I need you to help me, the interviewer, understand how you are going to bring your skill stack to this company and help us with our pool of talent, existing and future, and grow them, so that the whole company gets better, so that we all perform better, so that people progress in their careers, right? And so that's why this question was asked. Let's see what he has to say.
Okay. Sometimes my role here was to give her feedback on her behavior, and also giving her space and autonomy so she could do the job that needs to be done. My job was mostly motivating her and challenging her to do the jobs that we combined. How can I say that? During the career plan, I asked her what are her goals from the future, short term, mid term, long term. And in order to reach that levels, she needs to develop certain sort of competencies. And then I help her on deciding what competence she should develop. For instance, she wants to migrate from associate product manager to a product manager. In order to do that, she needs to develop her strategy and planning competency. And she didn't know that back then. Then I indicated her some courses to study, and also I always provoked her in order to do the jobs regarding this sort of work.
So this is again a situation where the candidate is just remaining too high level. As he's working through the progression of his answer, and he's talking about, in this case, a very specific person who had a very specific career arc that he could speak to. When asked for the details, it still remained a bit elusive, right? As an interviewer, I'm looking for a bit more depth. Okay, what did you do specifically? How did you help them specifically? And he starts to touch on it. Well, we identified these competencies where the candidate had gaps, and my job is to motivate them. That's a true answer, but it's not sufficient, right? So in what way were they deficient? How did you identify this? How were you going to put this candidate in a position to develop those competencies? Motivating someone to develop those competencies is not sufficient, right? Because you as the leader have to give them the opportunity to go work on those things. You can't rely on bias for action and ownership to just go kind of pick up things that are outside of their area of responsibility and go and do a thing. You can't rely on that, especially for someone who's at the associate product manager level, because it's unlikely that they're going to kind of understand that they can go do that or even have the moxie to go do that kind of thing. It's less likely a trait to see. So as a manager, when you're interviewing, my expectation as the interviewer when talking to a manager is that they can walk me through an example and say, okay, well, they had worked on this project and it was clear that they were missing these things. And so this is the way, like we said, okay, we're going to build out on this competency and we're going to work on these types of projects. And these are the sorts of things we're going to work on. And this was the timeline we put in place to kind of make sure that we were working on those sorts of things. And it turns out for one of them, we didn't have a project. So we actually worked collaboratively. We looked across the organization for opportunities to put this person in a position to grow the set of competencies that they didn't have that weren't necessarily presenting themselves within the team. Now, obviously I've made all that up, just kind of spur of the moment here. But the point I'm trying to make is it's not sufficient to say my job was a motivator and this person had gaps. And then we worked on that. There's just not enough detail there. That's helpful. Thank you. What about a time where, I guess the way to frame this would be a person who was on your team, direct report somewhere in your tree, who wasn't being successful, right? They were failing to meet expectations. They weren't quite getting there. But you decided to invest in them anyway, to ensure that they were continuing to grow, despite the fact that they were clearly not getting there. Why did you make that decision? If you did, if this is not a situation you dealt with, just say so. It's fine. Why did you make the decision? What did you do, and what was the outcome? So there's a couple of reasons why I asked this question. First and foremost, to this point, the depth of detail simply hadn't been there. And so this is me putting the candidate in a position to talk about something that maybe is less positive, or maybe they're less sure about, or maybe even possibly embarrassed, right? It's sometimes going to be embarrassing to talk about underperformers on your team. But I also want to understand how you as a manager deal with underperformers, right? It's not what's the saying? The rising tide raises all boats. Well, when everything is going great and everybody who works for you is awesome, you look like a great leader. Cool. And so this candidate has now, throughout the entirety of this answer, talked about, well, my job is to motivate, and they had gaps, and so we worked on that. But there's not enough specifics or details, and so it leaves open the possibility that their direct reports were just really good, and overcoming deficiencies of their manager in terms of how they, as a manager, are growing the talent on their team and ensuring that the talent on their team is expanding their capability set. Right? Expanding their competency set. And so in asking about an underperformer, the core of the question here is, cool, you've talked about what's went really, really well. Help me understand how you deal with the underperformers. Can you turn, not to put it crassly, can you turn losers into winners? Right? Can you take someone who's underperforming and can you turn it around for them? Can you understand why they're underperforming? Is it a core competency skill gap that they simply can't overcome because of IQ challenges? Or is it because they're highly unmotivated because they've worked for really bad managers up until you and you're awesome and you solve that problem? It could be any number of things, but it's really hard to have a turnaround situation and make it work. And so that's the point of this question. There just hadn't been enough detail. Great. So I'm going to really lean on that hard by asking this candidate, it's no longer sufficient for you to tell me you had a great person who did great things. Now you got to tell me about a person who didn't do anything good and you still turn them into a great employee. I recognize that that's a very highly specific situation. If you don't have one, it's fine.
Okay, I have one, but it was like really passed behind. It was more than 9 years ago, where I had a failure. I tried to invest. I decided to help the person on that situation to deliver better, to behave better, but the person just didn't came up with and couldn't help. And then I decided to, how can I say that in English? I decided to fire the person after 2 months trying. And I'm currently living. I don't know, is that enough, or do you want another?
Just tell me more. Like, what was going on? How are they failing? What did you do to try and help them?
Mm-hmm. Okay, the person was failing on delivering results, delivering tasks. We had some schedule arranged and some dates to deliver the tasks. And the person was like almost always failing and delivering days later or weeks later. Sometimes the person didn't deliver at all. It seemed that she didn't have the will to work for the job anymore. And what I try to do was to get closer, try to do a more frequent follow-up, like on a daily basis. I get to the person's table and I talk to the person, try to help, ask if she needed something, but it just didn't work.
Well, that, again, I fully recognized in how I asked the question, even gave the candidate an out saying, look, this is highly specific if you don't have a good story. But what we saw here is kind of a bit more of a continuation of the trend of the candidate just staying at an extremely high level and simply not providing the details. And, a 9-year-old answer, it can be way difficult to recall specifics, and I get that. But this was a recurring theme throughout this entire answer block, which makes it really challenging to advocate hard for the candidate in terms of their ability to hire and develop the best. But the assessment that would have been read into the room is as follows. Candidate demonstrated that they are an empathetic leader who has a strong desire to help their team members grow in role. What did not come through in this answer block was a sufficient level of detail to help the interviewer understand how the candidate is evaluating their team members on a consistent basis, what methods are in place for overcoming obstacles, and how this all comes together in service of the team. Interviewer acknowledges that English as a second language may be a factor at work. This is critical. Not all interviewers will recognize that. Not all interviewers will be okay with that. You'd be surprised, you'd think in this day and age that people are just accustomed to kind of working with people where English is not necessarily their first language, and they kind of give them a little bit of leeway, understanding that sometimes the interpretation can cause struggles. Sometimes people just don't do it, and it's kind of a shame. My overall sense of this candidate, just across the entirety of the interview, very, very strong. And I do think language is what got in the way. This was Hire and Develop the Best was the first question block for this candidate in this interview. And so he also was a bit nervous and had to settle in. But the underlying facts remain, which is too high level, not enough detail, and didn't get into specifics of how they were growing their team, right? It almost feels like, to steal an American term, which may not make sense to the international audiences, he was speaking as if he was born on third base and acting as if he hit a triple, right? Because he had employees that worked for him that were great and they got promoted, and that's awesome. Sounds great, but what did he do? And that didn't land. My gut is telling me he's a great and empathetic leader, and he wants his team to be successful, and he helps grow them. But I couldn't sit in a room with other folks on the hiring loop and make that case. And that's really the most important thing, because at the end of the day, and I say this again and again and again and again and again, you only have the 45 minutes to 1 hour with the person on the other side of the camera, table, whatever, for your interview. And the only data interface between you and them up to that point has been your resume and their job description, right? That's it. That's how the two of you have met in the market. And so when you sit down, the only additional data they have is what comes out of your mouth. So if you don't give them enough details, if you don't speak clearly, if you don't tell good stories, it just makes it really hard for that person to recognize how awesome you are. And one of the biggest surprises of Interview At has been, I thought I was going to be getting customers who were getting to me who were reaching too high, right? They were reaching too high to the stars and reaching above themselves. And it would have to be a lot of conversations of, you're just not ready. You can't do that. No, turns out the people that are coming to me, my core customers, the people that watch all of these videos like yourself and sign up for interviews at interviewyat.com, what they are is just bad at storytelling. What they are is bad at organizing their thoughts. What they are is they're doing the same dumb things I did when I was trying to get a job when I was leaving Microsoft, going to Amazon, and that I avoided doing when I left Amazon, which is the speech writing, right? You write out these long answers because you want to sound so smart, and it turns out you're just not telling a great story, which is a clear beginning, middle, and end, and answers the core questions that any intelligent person, any intelligent leader who was listening to you speak about this would probably ask you, especially if they, again, and this is important, don't work at your company, right? If they don't work at your company, they don't have the shared language, they don't have the shared culture, they're trying to stitch together what you're telling them and turn it into something that they can regurgitate and tell to other people, like, this is why this person's awesome. And if they can't do that, you've lost. You've lost the interview. It's not their fault. It's your fault. You have to communicate well. You have to tell good stories. You have to break it down into a flow where they walk out of the room and they understand what they just saw. And if you tell them a story in a kind of nonsensical, disordered way, it's going to be really hard for them to relate that story to someone else. But if it has a clear beginning, middle, end, situation, task, action, result, you work through it in a linear progression, you've overcome a lot of the obstacles that people have in the context of their interviews.